Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Today's episode is part 2 of an episode with my guest, Dr. Wrigley. We begin today's episode where we left off from part 1, talking about intermittent fasting and how a friend of mine has found that intermittent fasting reduces their appetite. We then transition into a conversation about red meat and whether or not we should fear it. So I hope you enjoy part 2 as much as I enjoyed recording it with the wonderful Dr. Wrigley as he shares his holistic insights and helps us all to heal. Thanks a lot, Doc. I know that some of the people I know who do it love it, and it definitely frees some of their time. They don't seem to think about food all the time. I have one friend who went to a conference and he literally did not see anything that he preferred to eat for lunch. And he just didn't eat. And he just used that time to be social and to network. And he was fine until he got home at 5 or 6. So it sounds like for the right person. And it's just good to hear that because my wife was very nervous about this idea of intermittent fasting, and it's good to hear from an expert who takes care of women, your perspective. So I watch the news. My doctor tells me I shouldn't because I can't really impact a lot of the things I see. It's very negative sometimes. And when I was watching the news, here we go, news flash, avoid red meat. And it's been, that I always hear that in the media, avoid red meat. And believe it or not, Doc, I'm a ribeye guy, so when I see that, I get nervous. And then I think about the men in my family who have had heart attacks. And I remember the fear in their faces when they were in the middle of experiencing that. And please, let's not talk about open heart surgery. It's just a lot to go through. So there's a lot of fear around red meat. I think a lot of people I know pause about red meat. So I just want to know from your perspective, Doc, if I periodically have a ribeye steak, is that gonna harm me? And I'll hold my breath, Doc, because if you say I can't, I don't know if I'm going to be able to live. So tell me what your thoughts are about red meat and how concerned should we be about that?
So red meat really got its bad rap from the fact that it is a pretty substantial carrier of saturated fat. And once we started this what now has become a myth, but we built an entire, the last 60-year dietary experiment on this idea that cholesterol from saturated fat is what it is that causes cardiovascular disease and cancer and stuff like that. Then it was pretty easy to go after red meat as a big culprit of what you would want to clear out of your diet for the reasons of high in saturated fat and high in cholesterol. That has not proved out to be true in science whatsoever. Matter of fact, the latest science would suggest that a diet that is more rich in high quality protein and red meat would fit at the top of the category of high quality protein, especially what we call ruminant meat. That would be things like from cattle, from venison, deer, buffalo, goat, elk, things like this, has a nutrient density to it that is just about unmatched. Maybe the closest thing probably to it is the egg. But these things that tend to now look like that they were the bad guys because they had fat and cholesterol in them are now proving to be some of the most nutrient dense food on the planet. And we're dealing with that most people are nutrient deficient. And so getting some high quality meat, especially red meat, I believe, and fish and eggs and things like that into the diet is more health promoting than it certainly has ever been negative at all. Now, one of the complications is when they do these studies and they say that you should avoid red meat, is that, and this is where the public, this is unfortunate because it's partly driven by medicines, partly driven by pharma, partly driven by the media. But when they do a study, they typically will do something like this. A lot of it's just done by survey, and they will say, how many hamburgers have you eaten? Do you typically eat in a week? And then, if they find out that the person who says I eat 8 hamburgers a week, that group had more cardiovascular disease or diabetes or something like this, then red meat, the burger itself, is the problem. And that is so ridiculous. I think, as the way that I'm saying it, and kind of with sarcasm, is to lead people to understand that, okay, the burger had ketchup, which is loaded with sugar and all the other garbage that's put into the bread and the bun. And then they probably ate the French fries and they drank a Coke and all of this other stuff. And then we're going to say red meat is the problem. So you should avoid red meat because of this study that we conducted. And it said, so anyway, now I will also answer that question with this, whether or not you're, I don't want to get into a religious discussion at all, but, and the reason I preface that is because sometimes when you talk about large numbers of years, some people, that may have conflict of that they don't see it that way. But whether you see it this way or not, for about the last 250,000 years that we know of, there has been a something that looked a good bit like us, not perfectly like us, but a good bit like us, that have been walking upright, who around that time and maybe even a little bit earlier developed how to use control fire. And when they did that, they sharpened their hunting skills. People have been eating red meat for at least 250,000 years, if not, 750,000 years. And now we're going to go the diet that we built ourselves on, which was whatever we could hunt, pick, gather, put together that was unprocessed, without oils that were squeezed through machinery or whatnot. So the diet that really created us to be here today, now all of a sudden you shouldn't eat that diet. I have a problem with that.
Yeah. Understood. And I totally agree. I think part of me wants to use common sense as much as possible.
Right.
The other part of me wants to use science. So I
Sure.
think you have to do both. And ultimately, it's not logical to suggest that we shouldn't eat meat. And it kind of goes, you kind of suggest it, let's look backwards, right? So even as we think about what's ancestrally appropriate, right?
Right.
I think there's different ways of looking at that. So another thing, as a patient that I think about is, what's appropriate for me. And I've had people tell me, whether it was a doctor or a nutrition professional, you're not a lion. You don't have teeth like a lion.
Right.
You were made to eat plants, right? And I there's a part of me that wants to use logic with that statement, but the other part of me understands, well, people have been hunters and gatherers forever and have thrived. So it's kind of, there's a message there. So and this doctor who I talked to about this was a doctor trained in nutrition. And I figured, man, they got to know what they're talking about. They have all this education in nutrition. And I've seen documentaries like Forks Over Knives and What the Health, and they confirm this doctor's belief that a plant-based diet is the best diet for humans because we don't have the teeth of lions. So, and you talked a little bit about ruminant animals. They chew things, it goes into their rumen, and then they chew it again. And I'm not sure that's something that we can do as humans, but clearly that makes sense for that type of animal. But your thoughts on this idea, Doc, that we should only eat plant-based? That's the most like appropriate diet for humans. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's garbage. But, but I know that I wouldn't say that to a patient. Uh, so it's like this. First of all, when people talk about we're not lions because we don't have huge incisors and these types of jaws to be able to rip raw meat. Well, you know what? Okay, but you know what we do have? We have hands, right? We don't have to have all of this mechanism that other animals who are predators in the safari in Africa would need in order to take an antelope down. We have other skill sets to be able to, source our meat. So yeah, that's a poor argument to me. Secondly, when you talk about, we should eat, ruminant animals can, chew the cud, basically take that food, which is, it's not even the food that they're eating. It's the bacteria in their gut that feed off of this that are able to produce massive amounts of protein that grow a 2,000 pound steer, right? We can't do that. We can't eat grass or just salad or whatnot and maximize protein efficiency to grow, the structure that we need. So that argument doesn't really look well either. I think that what an ancestral appropriate diet would look like is, well, first of all, you got to look at, people ought to spend more time thinking about what's the diet I should eat for where I live. And that, that'll answer half the question is like, okay, what seasons do you have that, when do things grow and your farmer's market is open? And when is it that we have to rely on stuff being shipped 3,000 miles away in order for you to put it on your plate? Should give you, kind of like a steering in a direction. So if you're living in the Midwest, that would make it clear of what seasons that you're going to have local produce and be able to eat more vegetation. And it's probably better for you because it's grown locally just down the street and you're supporting local farmers and things like that. There also would have been a period of time where you're not going to have that available. And that would have been hunting season. Okay, this is when you were going to have to rely on things like your skill set to be able to either hunt, fish, gather through root vegetables and things like that. So I think the ancestral diet looks a whole lot like the hunter-gatherer diet. Like what? Yeah, I think I see it this way. If you were living 20,000 years ago, long before any kind of socialized civilization was going on, it wouldn't have taken people long. They probably did this many thousand years before what I'm talking about, but certainly we would have gotten to a point where everything became about economics. And when I say economics, it would have been this. You want the biggest bang for the buck. So if you are looking for nutrients, your body needs to be fed in order to make sure that you can live in this cave and run from a lion when it's chasing you or whatnot. You're going to go out each day, and what you're going to look for is what is, with the least amount of energy I can spend, what is the biggest bang for the buck that I can get in order of nutrient dense food to put into this body to really make it strong and healthy, right? Well, hunting would have been the number one thing that would have shown up, because if you're going to go out and spend all day long trying to pick romaine lettuce, which didn't exist at the time, but the thought, and waste all of that energy for a food that has really no structural value or energy producing value to it. That's the gathering part. So the hunting part is, you wanted first for the hunt to be successful. You wanted to take down the buffalo. Then you knew that you got to feed your family and your tribe for at least the next week. Then in times where the hunt was unsuccessful, then you needed to be a good gatherer, and you needed to find, the most nutrient dense vegetation type food that probably would have looked a lot more like root vegetables and then things that grow above ground or whatnot. But again, I think economics has to play a role in what you want your
Mm-hmm.
diet to be, because you want the most nutrient dense foods that you can get, and then you want to complement that a little bit with some of this living, live, vibrant, colorful
Mm-hmm.
vegetation foods, the way that I see that.
Yeah, I think omnivores, probably are
Right.
in the best spot because and if for me, omnivore who leans carnivore because I do feel best with carnivore, but I do like vegetables, so I
Yeah.
still engage, and I think they're more fun to have a little variety there. Although I shout out to all the carnivores who are doing that
Yeah.
exclusively. I think about with your comments the chimpanzees. Like I was watching Discovery Channel. I honestly didn't know that chimps, that they ate meat sometimes. And as I mean, it wasn't evidence based, but as the documentary was being, talked about, the guy the orator, he basically said that it was primarily because they needed a higher quality source of protein. It was exactly what you said. So even animals that we don't think about periodically, and they it's like a status thing in that world. Like the animals that are able to acquire animal protein, their status in the community is lifted up. So because it's such a valuable thing. So it's a very interesting thing. And again, quality matters.
Sure.
And there are still people, I always talk about the DIAS score, which is the digestibility score for amino acids. And I tell you, it's just impossible to suggest that the quality of protein outside of the animal community is going to be greater. It should be logical, but you'd be surprised how some people will push back on that reality. So a couple of things we can touch on real quick that I think are interesting is as a patient, I've always been told calories are so critical. I know that a lot of the weight loss programs are really focused on calories and moving more, eating less, that type of methodology. It does seem logical. And most of my friends are like, I'm going to start losing weight. And the first thing they say is, let's, we got to join the gym, right? And that's their focus. And
Sure.
yet, so many of them, in fact, I have one friend who is overweight who runs marathons, and I don't know how that's possible, but so my thought, something's wrong with that way of thinking, but I wanted to hear from you, this idea of how important are calories and exercise more, eat less. What have you learned throughout your journey?
Well, I've kind of come full circle from thinking about it just like, you're the people that going to talk that way to you about what are we going to do here as far as restricting calories or whatnot to, uh, well, let's just put it this way. My wheelhouse is in hormones, and what changed everything for me, because I found myself carrying a huge amount of extra weight, um, maybe 9 years ago or whatever. And the way that this all happened for me is I began to think through it and go, wait a minute, let me look at what it is that I do know and that I kind of specialize in, and see what is that going to teach me about how I got myself into the situation where, I was eating all the whole grains and all the beans and all
Mm-hmm.
the, whatever you're doing, and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because I wasn't really doing much other than clinical practice, wasn't exercising much or whatnot, but I ballooned up quite a bit. So anyway, I'm trying to get back to your question, but it's about what I learned is that when you look at the calorie in versus calorie out model, the exercise model, the you need to burn more calories model or whatnot, the truth of the matter, Tony, is every bit of that's important. But there's nothing that's more important than the hormonal response to the food that you put in your mouth. Again, let me go back and do a checkbox. I believe that one of the most efficient things that does need to happen if somebody needs to lose a large amount of weight is that you do need to create a bit of a calorie deficit. I mean, I think that's very important, but that calorie deficit doesn't need to be like, oh, I need to go on a 800 calorie diet when you need,
Mhm.
1900 calories in your diet. Um, what it needs to be is like maybe you knock 100 or two of those calories off to put yourself in a slight caloric deficit. But
Mhm.
again, and then we can say the same for exercise. Yeah, it's tremendously beneficial to exercise your body mainly for the function of increasing the capacity of heart and lung and building muscle strength and muscle mass. But this is not about weight loss. That
Mhm.
you can't out we say this all the time in our space or whatnot. You can't out exercise a bad diet. That's just not never going
Mhm.
to happen. Right?
Right.
So with that being said, but both of them are extremely important. We would want those to be complementary. Now we can move into the third thing that I was talking about, and that is, um, to me, this is completely all hormonally regulated. This is the difference between you eating a candy bar and you eating a ribeye steak, or you can forget about adding up calories. This is about one of them will send a hormonal cascade in a pro inflammatory, insulin spiking
Mhm.
craziness soup inside of your body that eventually is going to lead to not only blood sugar problems, but definitely weight gain because you've got to store all of that excess sugar after it got turned into triglycerides somewhere, right? So there's that. And then there's a food that might even have more calories in it. But when you eat
Mhm.
it, you get very little insulin response. Your blood sugar stays in a balanced pattern. Therefore, all of these nutrients are partitioned into places that they need to go for an efficient metabolism and fuel system. And it's like night and day of
Mhm.
it just takes away that whole calories in, calories out thing to a certain deal is that you want to be eating a diet that is anti-inflammatory, that is low in what we call hyperinsulinogenic foods, which would be simple carbohydrates and things like that, low in things that are like processed industrial oils, like canola oil and things like this, that are pro-inflammatory and also drive insulin resistance or whatnot. So anyway, when we get back to real food, we're talking about if you eat a whole food diet, that's the best way to start your journey towards fat loss. Then, if you can create that little bit of a caloric deficit and add some strength training and maybe some, a couple of sessions of long walks throughout the week or something like that, you've got the sweet spot at that point of what it takes in order to drive and become a leaner individual.
That's fair, and I think that makes sense. It's so nuanced, and I'm so glad as a patient that I've asked that question because you hear so many different answers, and it's nice to know that some of what was told to me is right, and you've kind of provide some clarity about what part of it how I need to think about it. So it sounds like, yeah, you definitely have to create a calorie deficit, but man, there are certain nutrients that are gonna treat your body or make your body react metabolically differently.
Right.
And so that's really, really cool. So thank you for that. And I guess one of the diets that has been discussed that's very popular these days is this keto diet. And I have family members that are doing keto, and it's in or low carb and things like that. And but they tend to have a lot of keto products. I mean, literally, I walked into their house and I saw keto this, low carb that, all over their counter. And I know I've heard this term dirty keto, right? So
Right.
and you know, it seems weird to me that they would replace what would be conceived as unhealthy snacks with these keto snacks. I understand why they do it, because they remind them of those things they once enjoyed. So I'm just curious as it relates to that idea. If I decided to do a keto diet, what's your thoughts? Is it okay to eat all of these keto products? Is it necessary to eat these keto products to be a keto diet person? Or, what's your thoughts on that? Because it's very confusing when you walk into the store and they have like a keto section, a
Yeah.
low carb section of the store that never existed previously.
Well, I think the answer is that it's it's a reflection of the world that we live in, that
Hmm.
um, driven by marketing, business, profit, or whatnot, that somebody is going to take advantage of something that's an idea like the ketogenic diet, and then try to capitalize on uh, these types of things. And I think it's unfortunate, although I'm pro business and capitalism, and people should be able to be entrepreneurs and do their own thing. But again, getting back to your question, these are foods that are really, they're void in nutrition, and doing really anything beneficial. Now, as a caveat, that I will say this, where there is maybe a market for this is, one of the most fascinating things about a ketogenic diet, for those who really understand what that means, is its ability to do things like uh, to arrest seizures and some of these neurodegenerative issues that we see, that by putting your body in a state of a good amount of ketones always in the bloodstream, there's amazing things that can happen for that. So if you're
Hmm.
somebody who suffers from grand mal seizures, and you need to be on a ketogenic diet, meaning that you need to be like down at 5% of your total caloric intake, and only that can come from carbohydrate. You probably need all the tools you can get, right?
Right.
So, yeah, but for those who are running around saying, "I do the ketogenic diet," uh, and hoping to lose their 20 pounds that they're trying to get, and then get sidetracked by, "I want to eat keto pizza and keto muffins and keto donuts and stuff like that," I believe they're missing the whole point. The whole point was that you're looking for nutrient density, you're not going to find it there. And the beautiful thing
Hmm.
about ketosis is we would have spent a large amount of time there. Again, we talk a lot about going back pre-civilization, but if you're living back at a period of time where there's nobody who is growing and cultivating food to sell to you to take home to your family, and you're going out having to find your own food, believe me, you're going to be in ketosis quite a bit, because there are going to be
Hmm.
days where not only was the hunt not successful, but there's going to be days where you spent so much energy grabbing up vegetables that was not even enough food in order to prevent you from having to take some of your own body fat, break it down for energy, and produce these ketone bodies, right? So ketosis is a great thing, but it's kind of like it's almost like people are trying so hard for it rather than letting it come
Hmm.
natural to getting back to
Hmm.
the way you ought to be eating, right? And so again,
Hmm.
to answer your question, I'm not a big fan. It's hard for me because I deal with a population in my practice for sure, who, that's a conversation we have to have a lot, because
Yeah.
they want to know, is it okay? They want to know, is the goal that I just keep the carbs very, very low, meaning I can go eat all of this keto garbage that we're talking about or whatnot, and I have to educate them about, like, look, you getting into ketosis is nothing more than a byproduct of, we're going to focus on a really good high quality diet for you. And we're going to remove some things that allow your body to break down its own body fat to become fat adapted. And that's what we want to focus on. We're not going after do whatever you want to and keep your carbs low.
Yeah, and I think anybody out there listening, if I were to become a teacher for a moment, I would ask them to consider total carbs instead of net carbs. If you really think about it, if a loaf of bread has a low carb bread is 14 carbs, and you can, minus the 13 of the fiber, sugar, alcohols,
Right.
and now you're to one net carb. I mean, think about how much you could actually eat if you went with that equation, right? So I think for most people, what'll keep you eating real food is to do total carbs instead of net carbs. And this is a process, guys. Like as I continue with my teaching hat as a clinician, I was a net carb guy until I realized for a lot of people that wasn't going to work and I think it's gotten worse. When I started this journey 9 years ago, it got worse because there was less products available 9 years ago. Now you can go into any grocery store and get a low carb or keto bread. You can go to any grocery store and get products that have keto on the label. So I just think that because things have evolved, we have to evolve with that and not get caught up. And I'm like you, I'm an entrepreneur. I love America. I love capitalism, but we have to be careful. And what you want to do is use those as your kind of it's convenient. If I'm going to cheat, that's a safe way to cheat, right? But I don't want that to be the main thing that we consume every day. So I love that. So a couple of really quick, like wrap up questions. Fiber real quick. Some people try keto. I mean, and I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that. It's I'm going to keep my teaching hat on. Overrated. And it's funny because in our functional medicine training, in our nutrition training, they will emphasize fiber, right? But the lion doesn't really need fiber, and the lion probably doesn't have to have as many bowel movements as the that ape that sits around and eats plants all day, right? So I just think that we have to understand why we have bowel movements, why we don't need to have bowel movements if we eat foods that are highly absorbable. But any other thoughts about fiber before we go to any other talking points?
Well, I'll try to tie that into something that I meant to talk about earlier that you asked a question about and we didn't get to. I think when we were talking about the red meat and is a plant-based diet better and how that goes into the fiber thing is that, and we can tie all that together at one time, is the argument against plant-based eating is that, and that might support a little bit more pro animal protein eating, is this: animal protein, there's nothing in red meat, fish, eggs, and just about anything else you can think that comes in the world of animal protein that has inside of it a defense mechanism to prevent itself from being eaten. So there's nothing in a steak that is there that does anything but you digest it, you get all these amino acids out of it or whatnot. You can't say that about any plant. Every plant has a defense mechanism that is designed to not be consumed by something else. And so whether it be these anti-nutrients that bind up minerals in your gut, whether it be poisons, so to speak, at a subtle level, whatever it may be, plants have things in them that are defense mechanisms to not be ingested. And so, how that plays into the fiber thing is how much of the fiber thing about making you go to the bathroom is related to it's because it irritates the lining of your gut and your body's reacting to it. And therefore, you need to, get all of that inflammation out of you, as opposed to the idea that there's something highly beneficial about eating roughage. That, again, the only reason that it causes you to move your bowels more is because when that roughage comes up against the lining of these little endothelial cells in the digestive tract, it's an irritant. I mean, it irritates the wall of your intestine, which causes your body then to secrete water into the intestine to dilute the inflammatory process from the abrasion of the. So, the people that argument for we need a high fiber diet. It might be the same argument as, and those for on my side of no, we don't, might be the same argument of how valuable really are plants in
Yeah.
your
Okay.
diet, right?
Okay. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah, something yeah, something there. So, yeah. Well, this makes recording fun because there's always surprises. Just like I
Yeah,
was surprised when I learned that plants had things in them that could harm us. And I think that as I continue with my teaching hat, when I was in my functional medicine training, I had not really heard much about hormesis. And for those who are listening, it's basically how our body responds to these plants. And some people believe that plants are still beneficial because a low dose stimulation, that's not killing you, may be beneficial in that it strengthens us, right? But then if you get too much of that, it could be toxic. And
right.
and my argument is, and that may be true, but I just don't like what's happening to our gut when this occurs. Is the benefit going to outweigh the potentially leaky gut that develops over time because of the irritation or just the discomfort, the life that you're trying to live? Is it going to be
Right.
impacted in such a way you can't eat the Brussels sprouts because it irritates you? So anyway, I just think that. So the last thing as a patient I want to ask you is supplements. As a do you recommend supplements to patients as a general theme? Is it necessary? Is it, how do you approach that question?
Um, I absolutely do. And anybody that's going to find me on social media is going to see that I take it very, very seriously for many reasons. I look at with things like nutritional supplementation when done correctly. And to answer this question, you got to take a deep dive into, first of all, before you're even going to talk about nutritional supplementation, you need to be talking about, well, first of all, there's the whys. We'll get there. You got to talk about, where are these nutrients coming from? So I'm a big proponent, and in my practice, I use a lot of nutritional supplementation, but I do so for the purpose of using them to do specific things. I don't believe in any way is it beneficial to do a shotgun approach to nutritional supplementation, like go take all of these different nutrients that we've heard do great things for you and end up being one of those people who has 20 bottles of stuff they swallow every day, hoping that something in there sticks to the wall and makes a difference for you. I think that's poor. That's poorly thought out. But what I was saying is, so once I made that, you got to look at nutritional supplements are like everything else in this world. It's the vast amount of quality of nutritional supplementation is like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, I guess it's could be a little bit like cars, like that you would know that. Um, you remember the old the Opal or something. Some of these cars, anyway, these things that would be cheaper model cars or whatnot, up into, and then the extreme of that would be the handcrafted quality that would go into either, Mercedes Benz or even upward into like a Bentley or a Rolls Royce. It's like that, and you are getting what you pay for. And one of the things that I have the hardest problem with is that when I make a recommendation, because we need to drive a specific pathway like liver detoxification or strengthening adrenal function or um, getting more magnesium into the nervous system by binding it with glycine or something like this. These are things that we are going after that make a huge difference. And what makes a huge difference is who is it that's putting this together? What is their raw material that they're using to do this? Is this third party tested so that people know that exactly what it says is in this bottle or whatnot,
Yeah.
as opposed to I cringe sometimes when, and it's sometimes it's my patients who I find out are, they're just shotgun shopping at Costco for
Mm-hmm.
the cheapest fish oil or something they can buy because that sounds like a great idea. If you can get 1,000 fish oil capsules for $7, that sounds like a great
Mm-hmm.
idea. I wouldn't put that in my mouth. I mean, you can
Yeah.
guarantee you that that's a already oxidized rancid oil that probably doesn't have anything that they say is in it. So again, I know that I'm all over the place with that, but so the answer is yes. I utilize a good bit of nutritional supplementation because I have found over the last 25 years that I can do a lot of the work that medicine that typically we think medicine or pharmaceuticals do, given the right nutrient makeup. Like for instance, you hear me probably talking a lot about berberine. Berberine is a botanical
Mm-hmm.
that's been used in Chinese medicine for 5,000 years, but now is being hugely studied and promoted with great reason. Of this botanical has all of the benefits that metformin does without any of the side effect protocol, without other than the
Mm.
10% of some people will get a little GI upset for as they're transitioning to their body getting adjusted to it or whatnot. But so there are so many things that can be used as alternatives to just drugs. And it's like this goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. It's great to have a toolbox that's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
bigger than your script pad, right, Tony? Like you to know a lot of people are nutrient deficient. A lot of people don't
Mm-hmm.
know that if a woman is showing low signs of progesterone but is still healthy enough ovarian wise to produce more of her own progesterone, then you don't need to put her on progesterone. You can use some activated vitamin B6 called pyridoxal 5 phosphate as a supplement that the ovaries utilize in order to make more progesterone. And just that little nudge right there can be all the woman needs in order to put her hormones back into a healthier balance. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I like it, but it's got to be well
Yeah.
thought out. And I think that I think people need to seek out, you know, professionals who know what they're doing with these things rather than just
Mm-hmm.
running
Mm-hmm.
down to their local health food store and buying up bottles of stuff and swallowing it.
Yeah, that's important, and so it sounds like quality matters. So for
Yeah,
those who
big
are
time.
listening, quality matters. When it comes to carb restriction, I always ask my patients, let's start, look at your budget, let's see where you are,
Right.
and they may not be able to do supplements at all,
Sure.
but I prefer they get some all these cheap ground beef than to eat foods they shouldn't
Sure.
be eating, processed, highly
Absolutely.
refined grains. So there's levels to this, guys. And as you learn this, you always walk towards the highest quality. The key, though, is to understand what harms you, stay away from that. And again, it's very simple: processed foods, sugars, refined grains. Even a vegetarian. A vegan would agree with that. So I think it's like, let's do that first. And
Yeah.
then as we start to improve the quality of our protein, and of course the quality of the supplements, we can move towards a model where we're doing really well. So we're wrapping up, and the wrap up question, as you already know, is how are you going to protect your nest? What are you going to do over the next 12 months so that we will have you available in the Caribbean or wherever you are, helping to spread these healing messages? Where's your focus, Dr. J?
Well, my focus is to continue to build out Well, okay. One is I'm very excited to begin doing a podcast myself with my partner Heidi. We're in the
Yes.
plans now of building something that'll be a little bit more um, broad range than just health topics. Now, certainly because of my
Yes.
wheelhouse again, we'll talk a lot about women and hormonal health and stuff like that. But we also want to showcase the Caribbean, and we want to showcase cooking
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and travel and living your best life type of thing. So we're excited about maybe getting that started. I've got some writing that I'm in the process of doing because I think that it's about time. I've got enough of a following
Mm-hmm.
now that is saying, "Listen, we need you at least for that peri and postmenopausal landscape change that leads sometimes to weight gain and insomnia and lethargy and lack of mental clarity. Like, what's that all about? And what's the best way to get on top of that through diet, supplementation, maybe bio HRT? So I think there will be some writing that I put out from that, and then a lot more of just doing the work that I love to do, which is to sit down with individuals, whether it be men or women, and just say,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about where you are right now. What's missing as far as your experience that you want to have? Is it, whatever it be? Are you tired? Or do you feel like you cannot put on muscle mass if you're a man? Or you have problems? Anything that I can trace back to this is a hormonal shift that happens somewhere between 40 and 60. And then build them out a roadmap of if you want your energy and your strength back, you want to sleep, you want to turn the hot flashes off, you want the night sweats to go away, you want your sex drive back, all of this kind of stuff, then from all of my experience, this would be the way that you do that. Here's how we would structure your diet. These are the nutrients we may use for your particular case. We may want to use a little bit of hormone in your case, Miss Jones, because of some, whatever that may be. But to build people plans that if you go out and hold yourself accountable for doing this work, it's going to change your life. Like you see all the time that people who
Yeah,
recreate
miracles.
metabolic health in their body by choosing to eat in a way like we talk about or whatnot, it just shows up like night and day. And, that's a
It's
fun thing to teach people, right?
it's miracles. You feel like a healer, and so I'm really excited. One of the gifts of my podcast is I do get a chance because I have a acronym that covers the roots of the functional medicine tree, right? So it really
Right.
allows me to talk about different topics, which I think is great, not just low carb and things like that. I'm assuming you don't have a name for your podcast yet. You're
No.
still vetting that, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
figured that, so that's okay. So that let's I kind of chuckled when you said I'm building up a following. You got 65,000 on Twitter. You're not doing too bad, Dr. J.
It's
So that's
been fun.
wonderful, and I'm really excited that people have found you, and I'm looking forward to the work you're going to be doing. So let's wrap up. Just make sure everybody knows. I did notice that you have a link, drjwrigley.com/links. That's one of the ways people can kind of get to you. It looks like.
For
But
sure.
where else can people find you?
We're mainly on, the social media kind of platforms of Twitter and Instagram. And I think we started doing some Pinterest stuff, but that's all Hormone Diet Doc. So you'll find me on, mainly on Twitter and Instagram. And then we have the website that you just mentioned, drjwrigley.com. And then you could do the backslash links and you'll see other places that will take you to, you know, some of the nutrients I talk a lot about. We have an online pharmacy where I keep some of the stuff that I use for my patients there that's available to anybody, but it can be either something that people can access for that reason or for just educational purposes. So, but yeah, that's how you can find me. And Tony, I so much appreciate this. That I love it when it goes. We're a little bit longer than we thought, and that's always a good sign because that means that
Yeah,
yeah, we didn't
that's
run
right.
out of stuff to talk about, or that's always
Plenty,
a good thing.
plenty. And it's really it's funny you say that. I definitely this may be the I may actually make this a part one. And Dr. Not Doctor, but A-Day Fox, the Black Carnivore, sometimes she'll have a part one and a part two. We may want to consider that for this episode, but I just felt like we needed to touch on these topics, and a little disappointed that outside my window it's raining and it's 70, but it is what it is. And I wanted to sit outside today, but I guess I'll just hang out on the inside, or maybe find a covered area to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate you.
Well, you let me know
From
when
the
you're ready to take. I know you're working hard, so let me know when you're ready for a vacation, and
man.
we've got a place for you right here.
Well, that's beautiful, and I promise you, if my wife will hear this episode, she may call you before me. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you. And I'll just say a few wrap up thoughts. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So thank you for everybody who is here enjoying this wonderful episode with my friend Dr. Wrigley. I really appreciate this episode. It reminds me of all the patients who just needed, wanted to find another way to achieve their goals, not just with, medicines and procedures and surgeries, but, a different path that they can optimize their health. And a lot of it is just getting to the root cause and having somebody to walk with you. So thankfully, we have clinicians like my guests who are leading us towards healing and allowing us to challenge conventional wisdom, providing alternative ways to achieve our health-related goals. And I hope you and I enjoyed our trip to the Caribbean with Dr. Wrigley as he answered some of the questions that may have been on your mind. But don't worry. I'm excited that he's going to have a podcast in the very near future, and I'll have additional experts like him who will continue to, enlighten us with their words of hope and knowledge and inspiration. So I promise we're going to continue to sharing these valuable lessons and work together as we help our friends and family. And as always, I thank you for being here with me today. And I hope that you continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.